All right, are we good?
So I don't have to redo it once I've done it.
That's interesting. All right, very good. All right, we are in Proverbs chapter 25. And we're going to begin with a history lesson. A history quiz, if you will. So, chapter 25, you'll notice verse 1 says, "These are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied." So we need to understand who's Hezekiah and who's Solomon and what's going on here. So if you remember, Solomon was the king of Israel at the time, and so here's my quiz question for you: what happened after Solomon in the land of Israel?
It split into two kingdoms, northern and southern kingdom.
Right. So this is right after Solomon. The kingdom split. One of his sons, Rehoboam, took on the 2 of the 12 tribes, and then Jeroboam, which is not his son, was actually a son of one of his persons in his court, actually stepped up and divided the kingdom into 2 parts. So the northern kingdom being called Israel, the southern kingdom being called Judah. Why do you remember why it split? It's mainly because Rehoboam was a ding dong. So he came in and thought he was he's king and he's in charge, and he raised taxes and he started kind of abusing the people. And as a result, there was an uprising that Jeroboam then led in order to split the kingdom. So it's because, if you remember, Solomon did not finish well. He actually got in trouble at the end of his reign, and his son Rehoboam unfortunately followed his bad example rather than the good example that he's laid down for us here in Proverbs. All right, so then after the kingdom is divided, then there's many kings between Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and Hezekiah. In fact, it's been 250 years between Solomon and Hezekiah. Now, what do you remember about Hezekiah?
He was one of the good ones.
Yep, he was a good king.
He was a good one for a while. He also did not end well, similar to Solomon. Anything else about Hezekiah you remember?
Temple brought back sacrificial systems. Brought back.
I can't hear you, Susan.
I don't want you to tell me I'm wrong.
She knows you too well, Rich. Your reputation precedes you.
I still can't hear you.
He brought back the temple. He reopened the temple.
Yeah. So again, he did good things. He reopened the temple. But at the end, he kind of turned in a similar way to kind of abusing his own people with taxes and everything else. And the other thing is, at that time, if you remember, the northern kingdom has already been trampled by the Assyrians. So they have been carried away, and all that's left is Judah. The Assyrians come against Judah, and Hezekiah goes to God and asks him to protect them from the Assyrians, and he does, and he protects them from the Assyrians. And then right after that, Hezekiah goes, "Man, I am good. I got God on my side, and he's going to protect me." And he starts acting like a ding dong. And as a result, then God sends the Assyrians again, and they wipe him out. So he's actually the last king of Judah, the last king of Israel, before they're all taken away into Babylon. So it's an interesting, distinction there from Solomon to Hezekiah. That's when you had the divided kingdom, and then after that, you've got them away at Babylon until they return. Yeah. Okay. So So as I said, 250 years. Hezekiah, his reign was like from 715 to 686 BC. All right, so think 700 BC, right? Now the question, so here again, let's go back to the verse. It says, these are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. So the way that most of the commentaries understand this is that during Hezekiah's reign, there were scribes in Hezekiah's court who actually found some of Solomon's proverbs that were not in the original list, right? And so brought them together, compiled those, if you will. Now, if you remember going all the way back to lesson number 1, when we talked about the book of Proverbs is a compilation of Proverbs, right? The ones in the beginning, as we saw, were actually written by Solomon. Then we went into the whole section of Proverbs that he brought in probably from Egypt. Here we have a section 25 through about 29, where these are Solomon's Proverbs, but they were brought in by other people. And then we'll see some Proverbs at the end that were actually written by other people entirely. It appears that all of this was brought together by some kind of editor, probably during the Persian Empire, probably, I don't know, 400 BC. So another 300 years after Hezekiah, then this whole book of Proverbs is brought together. So anyway, that's your history lesson for today, in case you're curious about how all this stuff plays out. So verse 1, as we've seen, is really just the introduction to this new section. That, as I said, takes us through chapter 29. But the real story begins in verse 2 then. So let's start there. It says, the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. So one thing that's important here is that the name God here is different from the way we've seen it before. You've noticed before we've talked about the Lord, the fear of the Lord. They use the name Yahweh. Here we're using the name Elohim, the glory of God. It's a more generic name for God, if you could say it that way, but it's certainly still referring to God in his glory. And so it's saying, the other thing about the word God here, it's the same word. What's interesting, it's the same word back in Genesis that's used when it says, God created the heavens and the earth. It's a plural word, right? It's a plural, which represents the whole Godhead. So in that sense, it's a more inclusive word than just Yahweh, which is specific to God the Father. God here is more inclusive of the Son and the Holy Spirit. So just again, for your background info. So it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, right? We've talked before about, God's mysteries, and that only God knows what God knows. Flip all the way back to Deuteronomy a minute. I chose Deuteronomy because I figured you could find it. Deuteronomy chapter 29. I can't find it, but hopefully you can find it. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. Deuteronomy 29:29. Mine says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, and those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of the law. So again, even all the way back in Deuteronomy, we have this distinction between things that belong to God, secrets that are God's, and things that are ours. The other verse I want you to see is all the way back in the New Testament in Romans chapter 11. Romans chapter 11, verse 33. Romans 11:33. Mine says, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. Right. So again, I think the point is that, when we talk, and we've talked about this before in here, right? If we have the pride of thinking that we can figure God out, that's a mistake. God is God, and he is way bigger than us. His thinking is way bigger than ours. And let's not get God in a box about how he should act, what he should do. It's his glory to conceal a matter. It's his glory to have mysteries. It's his glory not to be understood. But then interesting is the second part of the verse, right? But the glory of kings is to search out a matter. Now, one thing I'm going to try to convince you of, when it uses the word kings here in the next 10 or so verses, you should take that as a message to you. Okay. It's the glory. It's your glory. It's your glory to search out a matter. It's your glory that although God has concealed many things, God has many secrets, God has many mysteries, it's your glory. It's your job. It's your, God is excited when he sees you searching out a matter, when he sees you trying to understand him, when he sees you trying to understand his proverbs and put those into your life, right? That's your glory. That's when God gets excited, when he sees that you're doing that. And I think that's what's being said here. The glory of kings is to search out a matter. That's the glory that comes to you when you search it out. And we'll see kind of a pattern here as we go through these verses. So verse 3, as the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of a king is unsearchable, right? The heart of a king is unfathomable or unsearchable. And again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that man's heart is unsearchable. Man's heart is ununderstandable, right? And this is I think the connection he's trying to make here is that we can't even understand the heart of man. We can't understand the way people act and react and the things that they say. Nevertheless, God, who's unsearchable, right, and unfathomable. And so I think this is, again, pushing at our pride to not be thinking we can figure it out. We got it all together. We got the plan. No, God steps in. All right, verse 4 and 5. Again, these are often pairs. Take away the dross from silver, and it will go for the silversmith for jewelry. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. So, take away the dross from silver, right? That's the garbage part of silver as they purify it. And then it goes to the silversmith in order to make jewelry, right? You take away the trash and you've got good silver that then can be used. And the same way they're saying, take away wickedness from before the king, and his throne will be established forever. Interestingly, in the commentaries, there's two different ways they take this verse. One is take away wicked people from before the king, and his throne will be established forever, or established in righteousness. The second way is take away wickedness from before the king, or take away wickedness from the king, right? Take away wickedness from the king's doing, and his throne will be established in righteousness. I think both are good, but I do want to step in here and say, okay, the king is you, right? The king is you. Take away wickedness from you, either from the people that you interact with or the things that you do in your life, and your throne will be established in righteousness, right? That's what it's trying to say. Take away wickedness, either in the people or in the acts, and your throne will be established in righteousness. And if you remember back in chapter 16, we don't need to turn there, but it said, in fact, it was 16:12. It said it's an abomination for kings to commit wickedness. I believe it's the same connection that he's having here in these verses. All right, verse 6, 7. Do not exalt yourself in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of the great, for it is better that he say to you, come up here, than that you should be put lower in the presence of the prince. This probably reminds you of other verses, right? But first of all, connected to the previous verse, right? Do not exalt yourself in the presence of the king, right? Do not. This is not. This is not about trying to show how important you are. Whoever exalts himself. Let's go ahead and turn to it in Luke chapter 14. You'll remember the story. I think Jesus had this passage in Proverbs in mind in the story in Luke chapter 14, as you'll see. We'll start at verse 8. Luke 14:8 says, when you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him, and he who has invited you and him come to you and say, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those that sit at the table with you. And then verse 11, he quotes from Proverbs, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted, right? So Jesus uses the same example to highlight what is being said here in Proverbs about trying to exalt yourself, trying to put yourself up as somebody important, and then you actually be put down. I guess my question here is, how do we do that today? What's the way that we exalt ourselves that may get us in trouble?
People aren't good listeners. They're presumptive when approaching an issue or a challenge.
Yeah, Russell, I agree. I think that mostly the way we do this today is with our words, not so much the action. We don't do stupid things, like raising our arms and saying, I'm the most important person, but we do it with the things we say. We spout off what we think to be true, to show how smart we are, how up on things we are. And then, the people who are watching us are going, that's just pride, right? That's not humility. That's not God at work when we're trying to say that we know everything, and we're the first one to spout something. Fortunately, the election season is over, but it seems to be the primary thing that goes on as we go through those times. I would just be careful of what we say, and sometimes we can be sure it's true, and so therefore we're going to make sure everybody knows it, and we find out, oops, no, I've blundered, and you end up in shame. So I think, as is said often in Proverbs, to take your time and be careful. Russell, do you have something else?
No, I just told Deb it's a rare day, so.
Yeah, okay. Let's keep going. Verse 8. So do not, I'm actually going to start, I didn't read the last sentence in verse 7 because I really believe it belongs in verse 8. So I'm going to read that, right? It says, whom your eyes have seen, or what your eyes have seen, do not go hastily to court. For what will you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? Debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret of another, lest he who hears it expose your shame and your reputation be ruined. So you got to connect this, with 6 and 7 about exalting yourself, having that word. And what he's saying here is, and in some of your verses, in mine, it says, whom your eyes have seen at the end of verse 7. But it really could be what? It's one of those places where they don't actually have the word in there, and the editors have put in whom. And I think it may be better to say what, because I think what it's saying is what your eyes have seen, what you have seen, what someone has told you, the rumor that is being passed around. Don't take that hastily to court, right? Don't go and say, well, that's the truth. That is obviously what it is. And so I think the real, we may well be deceived. We may well be ignorant in what we have seen and what we have heard. And again, as Proverbs has told us over and over, take your time, make sure you understand what the truth is, or you're going to be put to shame. And then verse 9 says, debate your case with your neighbor, right? Take it to your neighbor. Go right to him. Go find out whether this is true or not, rather than your neighbor putting you to shame when the truth comes out. Go and have this conversation with your neighbor. Take it to him first. And so the dilemma that we have is we hear something about, so I won't pick on Russell. So we hear something about Rich, right? That Rich has done something really stupid, that he has sinned in some way. And what's our first response? We go and ask Tim, Tim, have you heard about Rich? Have you heard what Rich did, right? Hugh, have you heard what Rich did? Do you know what a dingaling Rich is, right? Instead of actually going to Rich and saying, Rich, is this true? Rich, what's going on? And Rich, can I help you? Rich, is there some way that you need some help in the midst of whatever this thing is going on? I think that's exactly what is being talked about here. Don't go hastily to court. Don't go hastily to everybody else, right? Rather, debate your case with your neighbor. Go to your neighbor and have the discussion. And do not disclose the secret to another. Do not be going around talking about it. and yeah, I think you got it. In verse 10, right? Lest he who hears it expose your shame and your reputation is ruined, right? Then you get the reputation of somebody who spreads falsehoods, someone who's always spreading rumors, etc. We're going to come back to this verse, but let's keep going. Verse 11 and 12. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. Right? So here I think what it's saying is when you go to your neighbor in verse 9, right, and debate your case with him, it's got to be with a word fitly spoken, with a word spoken at the right time, under the right circumstances, under the right conditions, if you will, and with the right attitude, right? Fitly spoken. That's an apple of gold, a word that's fitly spoken, a word that's done with the right attitude, with the right sense of, and we talked about this last week, actually, right? When you have an enemy, when you have someone who has done something against you, your response has got to be one of compassion, one of, okay, you hurt me, but why did you hurt me? What's going on in your life? What is the issue? How can I help you, right? So when you hear something about your neighbor, right, it ought to be, oh boy, I'm not going to, we may recoil and say, well, I'm not going to associate with Tim anymore because Tim is such a terrible person, right? It ought to rather be go to Tim and say, Tim, not only what's going on here, but how can I help you, right? How can I stand beside you? A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. It's a beautiful thing when there's a word fitly spoken. And then verse 12 carries it on. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. So that's the other part of it. That's the hearing part of it, right? For the person who is being rebuked, for the person who's being questioned, for the person maybe who has done something wrong, and someone comes to them and rebukes them and tries to clarify what is the issue. When they listen well, that's like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, right? That's good listening. You're bringing an apple of gold in settings of silver, and then the rebuker comes to an obedient ear. That's like an earring of gold and an ornament of gold, right? So it's both sides of the picture there. All right, we're not done with that picture yet, but we're going to keep going. Verse 13, 14, like the cold of snow in a time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his masters. Excuse me. Whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. So snow, the cold of snow in the town of harvest, this is a good thing, right? This means it brings coolness, it brings refreshing. And so what he's trying to say there is the messenger who brings a faithful message, right? The one who brings a faithful message, that is refreshing. That is a good thing. So connect that again back with verse 12, right? The person who brings a rebuke that is like an apple of gold is a refreshing, faithful messenger, right? He's bringing something that is refreshing to the soul because he's helping the person who has maybe messed up, maybe done something wrong, maybe hurt someone, right? Because he's being rebuked with words fitly spoken, it can be received as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold. Right? And it becomes then a refreshing to the soul. Verse 14, whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. So connect this to these verses. He's, if you falsely boast, you say you're going to bring a message, you say you're going to help, you say you're going to step in and even rebuke, and you don't do it, right? It's like clouds and wind without rain. It's useless. It's not refreshing. It's not useful. I'm going to ask you to turn to a funny place. Turn to Jude, the book of Jude. So go to Revelations and go backwards. Revelation, Joe said. Go to Revelation and go back to Jude. Go to Jude chapter 7. No, just kidding. There's only one chapter, right? Jude verse 12. Jude verse 12. And so in Jude, he's really talking about apostates who have come into the church, going all the way back to verse 3, 5, etc. But in verse 12, it says, he's talking about these people. It said, these are spots in your love feasts. While they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves, they are clouds without water, carried about by the winds like autumn leaves without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up to their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Pretty strong words against these spots. But going back to Proverbs, and he says, whoever falsely boasts about doing something good, he uses the word giving, but whoever falsely boasts about doing something good and doesn't do it, right, is like clouds and wind without rain. It's spots in your assembly. It's people who are hurting the group because they say they're going to do something, but then they don't do it. They say they're going to bring a message. They say they're going to respond in the right way, and they do not do that. They're like clouds without rain. Verse 15. By long forbearance a ruler is persuaded, and a gentle tongue breaks a bone. Long forbearance. What's interesting is forbearance means long. So this is long forbearance, right? So let's take this person that we've been talking about, right? Who has done something wrong, who has stumbled, and we go to them and we bring a message of rebuke, but we bring it fitly spoken, so it becomes an apple of gold, but they don't respond, right? They don't hear us. They continue in whatever issue it is that they're involved in. What verse 15 says is, it takes long forbearance in order to persuade that person. In order to persuade someone, sometimes it takes a long time. You can't just do it once. You can't just say it once. You can't just go to them once. You may have to help them a long time in order to move them. And if you notice in the second part of this, right, it says, a gentle tongue breaks bones. A gentle tongue breaks recalcitrant thinking, if you will, right? Someone has stuck in their thinking and they can't get out of it. If you remember all the way back in chapter 15, it talked about a soft answer, right? A soft answer in trying to approach this person. So, the other thing just to say here is that sometimes we give up too easy. When we have people that need the Lord, that need to hear the word, who are broken in some way, and maybe we say something to them, we go, and they didn't respond, we go, well, that's it. I tried. I did my best. And I think this is saying, by long forbearance, a ruler is persuaded, right? Long forbearance. It's just like, how long will you pray for someone? How many times will you witness to someone? How often will you go back? Many of you probably heard of George Mueller, right? George Mueller was a missionary. He was a man of God who believed in prayer, and who prayed and prayed and prayed and saw God do miraculous things. And boy, if you ever want to read a biography, this is a man you ought to read about, is George Mueller. But there's a story that was told about George, is that he had 5 friends who were unsaved, that he wanted to be saved, and he began praying for those men in the beginning of his ministry. During his ministry, like 5 years, I'm not going to remember the dates right, but like 5 years into his ministry, 2 of those men got saved at the same time. 15 years into his ministry, another one of those men got saved. Right before his death, the 4th man got saved, that he'd been praying for 30 years to try to get saved. And then interestingly, the 5th man, during his memorial service, got saved, right? So this is a long forbearance, right? This is praying for somebody a long time for their salvation, not saying, well, I prayed for them once, I witnessed to them once. Long forbearance. It's just a message. Verse 16. So in verse 16, so we've been talking about kings and talking about you guys in those first verses. We start looking at some bad actors here, beginning in verse 16. And it says, have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. So the top level understanding of this is, certainly you don't want to overdo anything, right? You want to be conservative in the way that you respond to things. Eat only as much as you need. But what's interesting is connecting this with verse 27, which comes up a little bit later. It says, it is not good to eat much honey, so to seek one's own glory is not glory. So he's connecting this not only to, just eating, but other things in your life, in particular, seeking your own glory. So getting too much positive response on what a wonderful person you are, right? Seeking out, what do you think? How did I do? What kind of person do you think I am, right? Trying to seek one's own glory, trying to prop oneself up. So in verse 16, it says, have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. If you start getting all of this, good comments about what you're doing, that's just going to pump up your pride. And as a result of that, it will not end up good in your stomach. It's interesting, the connection between those two. All right, verse 17, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. So this goes back to, so Susan and Tim, we're not talking to you here, okay, just to be clear. But it does remind me of Ben Franklin, right, who said, guests like fish begin to smell after 3 days. So, what's interesting here, though, I will just say, I think in today's world, we actually are leaning in the other direction. Instead of being interconnected with other people, we're independent. We're by ourselves, and we're afraid to ask for help. Not afraid, but we're embarrassed or whatever it is. We don't want to ask for help. We want to show how we can do it all by ourselves. It's like my grandkids saying, I did it all by myself, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for some, that's become a point of pride for us, which is unfortunate, because the Bible over and over talks about us being interdependent, right? One body, many parts, right? But pride somehow keeps us from asking for help and being interdependent the way that we're supposed to be. So I think that, verse 17 is on the other side of the fence. I'm afraid today there needs to be a new proverb about the way we need to be more dependent upon each other and more involved in each other's lives and helping each other and stepping up and being there for one another. I think we've become a little bit too independent.
Pitch. About a year, been over my neighbor's house for like 3 days in a row. to tell them something. And that last day when I went in, I said, don't worry, I won't be here long. And then I said, there's a verse in the Bible, and I quoted that one to him.
Yeah, that's good. All right, verse 18. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow, right? Bring false witness is like clubbing them over the head, slashing them with a sword, stabbing them with an arrow. You know, we have this saying, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's just not true at all. I mean, words are awful. Words are terrible. Or can be encouraging, as Joe said, right? Words are really important. And so bringing a false witness against your neighbor, it's like a club, a sword, a sharp arrow. Verse 19.
Rich,
Yes.
just one other thing. Don't quote verse 17 when the neighbor comes to your house, though.
Oh, Curtis. Okay, verse 19. Is that where we are? I've completely lost my place. Verse 19. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Right? This idea of a fair weather friend is like a bad tooth or a foot out of joint. I love that. You know, it's a bad tooth. When you push on it, when the pressure comes, when the trial comes, all of a sudden they're not there. Right. And so going back to my story a little bit ago, right, you have found out that Rich has committed some terrible thing. He's done something awful. So then the question is, would you still be his friend? Right? Would you reach out to help him? Or would you say, oh no, I can't associate with Rich anymore. People are saying that he is blah, 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 blah. I think that's important for us. Are you a real friend or are you a fair weather friend? Are you a bad tooth that when the trial comes, when the pressure comes, you back away and are not there in the midst of the trial? Verse 20. Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. One who sings songs to a heavy heart. This is the person who says, hey, don't worry, be happy. The person who, when tough things happen, our job as we are supposed to be interrelated is to be there, right? Not to try to make someone who is sad happy, rather to be beside them and to encourage them, but not to try, so I just think it's interesting, right? Like one who takes away a garment called whether like vinegar on soda, one who sings songs to a heavy heart. We got to be real careful. On the one hand, you want to encourage, but on the other hand, you don't want to make light of and expect someone to get over whatever it is that they're going through right now. You got to be able to walk beside them and be sad with them and hurt with them. Verse 21. So, from verse 16, we've looked at kind of some bad stuff. Verse 21 is finally something positive. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. So again, this is what you should be doing. You should be meeting their needs. You should be meeting their physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs, right? So again, if your enemy, that person who hurt you, that person who you don't like, is in need, give him bread to eat, give him water to drink. And then this funny verse in verse 22, right? For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. We see this is quoted in Romans 12, in case you're wondering if you've heard it before, right? Romans 12, 17 through 21, there's a story there, and it ends with this, right? So you will heap coals of fire on their head. What does that mean? You remember? By giving him bread to eat and drink, You heap coals of fire on their head. What does that mean?
They will understand the errors of their way.
Conviction.
Yeah, conviction, I think, is the good word, and they will understand the errors of their ways, right? You're putting it puts the ball back in their court, right? An enemy has done something. You guys are at an impasse with one another, and you take the first step, right? And you give them bread to eat when they're hungry, and you give them water to drink. Then all of a sudden they go, maybe I need to think differently about this relationship, about this person. It puts the pressure. You put coals of fire on their head. And interesting, right? The Lord will reward you for taking that first step. The Lord will reward you for bringing them drink, for helping them in their time of need. It's also interesting here to think, why is that person your enemy? Why is, your enemy is hungry, but why do you have an enemy? I'm not asking that question to get an answer from you, but that's an important question to ask. When you have angst with a person, why do I really have that angst? Is it pride within me? Is it a right that I'm holding on to? Is that person an enemy really because of something he did or the way that I responded to something that he did, right? And then we can start taking steps towards giving him bread to eat, giving him water to drink.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
How far, we're talking on a personal level here. How far do you extend that? I mean, we're talking about what's going on in Israel when the Smiths were there. Should we do this on a national level? Should we send food and things over to help those that are being persecuted, whatever, but not to the enemy? Is it something that, we stop at personal, or is it something that we extend?
So I'm not going to get into international politics here, but I think the answer is yes, we do extend it, right? And I think, as Susan and Tim have talked about before, right? They're looking at people that are coming in that need help. They're not saying, "Oh, we're only going to look at Jews that need help." We're only anybody that needs help, right? That ought to be our response. We ought to be helping who needs help. We ought to be giving water to who, whether it's our enemy or our friend. So, yeah, I would say it definitely extends.
Okay, well, yeah, again, to me, that's still personal. But yeah, should we be helping? I mean, we're helping Ukraine, okay? Should we be helping Russia because Russia's our enemy too? Should we be feeding them because they're our enemy? And I mean, that's just a thought, and I don't expect you to say yes, you're right or you're wrong. Just a thought I'm having. How far should we be looking at our officials putting out the hand of friendship and say, hey, can't stand what you're doing, but you need help, we're going to send you help.
Well, as we, that there's a difference between the Russian people and the Russian war machine, right? Should we have compassion on the Russian people? Yeah, we ought to, right? Should we make sure they're not dying from lack of food? Yeah, we should. That doesn't mean that, we allow evil to, just take over. So there's a balance there. I don't have the right answer, but there's a balance there.
Hey, Rich, you made me think Ecclesiastes, when I can't think of what chapter it is right on the top of my head, but where it talks about there's a time for everything. Yeah. How we have to, just try to be with somebody in the moment they're in. Might be, a death or whatever.
Yep.
21 remind me of that.
Yep. But don't jump to the international scene too quickly and forget your own personal issues. Okay. The people that annoy you and frustrate you and that you are enemies with, stay there. There's enough of that for us to do. Okay. 23. The north wind brings forth rain and a backbiting tongue and angry countenance, right? So a north wind, an unexpected wind brings forth rain, but a backbiting tongue, right? A backbiting, the word actually is a hidden tongue, a secret tongue, a word spoken behind someone's back, right? It brings anger. It brings anger. So it's just telling you, don't do that. Don't be talking behind people's back. Don't have secrets behind people's back. That's not good. It brings anger when people find out about it. Verse 24, here we go again. It's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than a house shared with a contentious woman. So now this is the third time. This is the third time that Solomon has told us about this. So all I'm going to say, I'm not going to get in trouble again. I'm just going to say, 1, don't be a contentious woman. 2, don't cause a woman to be contentious. Right? All right, verse 25. Well, 25 we've essentially already covered, right? Cold water is to a weary soul. So is good news. If you look back at 13, right? The cold of the snow in the time of harvest, it's the same thing. Good news, faithful messenger, someone who brings the right word, right? And is faithful in bringing that word, is cold water to a weary soul. Verse 26, a righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring in a polluted well. Oh boy. A murky swing and a polluted well are not good for anything. The righteous one who falters, and the word is maybe better translated, the righteous one who compromises, because it says it really means gives way, right? That person is not good for anything. The righteous who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring, a polluted well, not good for anything. Verse 27, it's not good to eat much honey. We've talked about this one, right? So to seek one's own glory is not glory. Don't seek your own glory. Don't try to puff yourself up. And then verse 28 is really, to me, a summary verse. It says, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. No rule over his spirit. In other words, he is himself is ruling. There's good English in there somewhere. Himself is ruling rather than the Holy Spirit ruling, right? He has no rule over himself. There's no Holy Spirit over his spirit. And so his spirit is ruling. And what happens when that happens? The walls of the city are broken down. He has no defenses against sin. He needs the Holy Spirit to rule his life. So what is that person like? We've seen that person earlier. Verse 6, do not exalt yourself in the presence of a king. Verse 8, do not hastily go to court. Verse 16, eat only as much as you need. Verse 17, seldom set foot in the neighbor's house. Verse 18, he bears false witness. Verse 19, is an unfaithful man. Verse 20, sings songs to a heavy heart. Contentiousness in verse 12. Verse 26, falters before the wicked. Verse 27, seeks his own glory, right? This is the one who has no rule over his spirit. If he does have a rule over his spirit, then verse 2, he searches out the matter of kings. Verse 9, he debates his case with his neighbor. Verse 11, he has a word fitly spoken. Verse 13, he's a faithful messenger. Verse 15, he has long forbearance. Verse 21, then if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, thirsty, give him water to drink. So this is the summary of chapter 25 is right there in verse 28. If you have no rule over your spirit, then you do all the things that are talked about here in verse 25 in the wrong way. If you do have rule over your spirit, i.e., if you do have the Holy Spirit ruling over your spirit, then you don't have broken down walls and you do what is right in God's eyes and you do what the Proverbs have been teaching us. Okie dokie. Any other comments or thoughts on this? By the way, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but it's also an honor to have Stephanie's mom with us today. Thank you for being here. Sometimes the camera, I can't see everybody. All right. Anything else before we go to prayer requests? What? Stop the recording, Joe says. Okay. Joe, any prayer requests?